My name's Tom, and I'm leaving the grind behind and hitting the road in search of adventure in my custom tiny studio on wheels. Welcome to Casa Nowhere. Don't forget to subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss anything. Well, hello internet. It's Tom again, back with another video. So I'm getting real used to living in the trailer, and I keep buying some more stuff, and it's just getting comfier and comfier. And in this episode, I do some things to get it ready for the fall, because it is starting to get a little chilly here. And the main thing there was getting my diesel heater ready to roll, and I did have some issues with that, but it is now good to go. I go through the problems I had and what finally fixed them. But just in case you find that boring AF, later in the video, had a end of summer barbecue blowout where I roasted a couple chickens, spit roasted some chickens on the fire, and ribs and a whole bunch of other stuff. It was delicious. I'll put a timestamp in for that if you don't want to see me messing with my heater. But for those of you who would be interested, I had some problems, and my pain could maybe be your gain in the future. I had an issue that was a little bit hard to find resources for on the internet, and it took me a couple tries to get it corrected, but now good to go. The trailer is nice and cozy, so let's jump right in with that heater project. Well, today it is a little chilly out. It's in the 50s, low 50s, and I'm gonna fire up my diesel heater for the first time. I don't know if you remember, but when I installed it, I tested the electronics and everything, but I figured, hey, there was no need to drive around with diesel in the back of the trailer, so I never actually fired it up with diesel in it. I've gotten a can and some diesel, and today I'm gonna fire it up. The first thing that I need to do is put a fuse into the fuse panel for it. I had heard that these things draw a little bit of power even when they're not in use, so I had pulled the fuse. So I'm gonna do that, fill it up with diesel, turn it on, and hopefully it will be just that easy. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, so we're off to a bad start. There's diesel leaking slightly from the bottom of the tank. I gotta figure out how to deal with it since I filled it so full. That was probably a bad move. And then also I forgot that after I installed this, I realized the fuel filter was backwards. So I'm hoping maybe that's why it didn't prime and isn't getting fuel. Yeah, so now I'm gonna try and fix this somehow. Alright, so I tightened up the seal coming out of the tank. I flipped the fuel filter around, and I'm going to put a little bit of fuel in this time. And then hopefully I'm going to have Mike come down and help me prime the pump so I can watch the fuel go through the line. Cross your fingers. So at this point, I was getting a little frustrated. I certainly corrected the first issue. The fuel tank was no longer leaking, so we were making progress. But I still had that E-8 error, and my heater was still not starting up. Everything I was reading was saying that was fuel. I was pretty sure I had fuel all the way to the heater, although I did have some bubbles in the line. And some people said that could be a problem. Some said it wouldn't be a problem. But either way, I was going to have to take the fuel line apart again, and that fuel line, the green fuel line that my heater came with, really doesn't want to come apart and go back together very well. So I ordered the other style fuel line, which uses hose clamps and will be a lot easier to work on in the future if I'm still having any issues. So let's jump into the fuel line replacement and hopefully get this thing fired up. All right, so I am back at the heater here. I don't know exactly what's wrong with it, I think part of it may be that the fuel filter was too horizontal and it was sucking some air in from there. I did read you do better with it more vertical, so I'm gonna put it more vertical. But since I had to take these fuel lines apart, everything I read was that those green lines stink, and you saw I had to heat them up to get them onto those fittings. So I ordered the better, more rigid fuel line, and these will be easier if I have to disconnect it again. Since I've already had to disconnect some stuff twice, I think this is a good idea. So yeah, I'm gonna replace all the fuel line, and then we're gonna go from there. Hopefully it'll start up. Well, at this point, I was sure I had fuel because I could pull the fuel line and tell that I had fuel there. I was still getting the E-8 error, so I had to dive a little deeper. And it turns out this actually doesn't necessarily mean you don't have fuel. It just means you're not getting ignition. So in my case, it wasn't a fuel issue. It turned out to be something else. But the good news is, last night I actually was able to get the heater to fire up. It was pretty dark. I was frustrated and I didn't film it, but I'm going to go over everything this morning. So I posted onto a Facebook group that deals with these heaters, and somebody suggested that I needed to test the voltage right at the heater as it fired up. And sure enough, when that glow plug was going and it was pulling that much juice, the voltage was dropping down under 10 volts, and that is why it wasn't starting. Luckily, I had a heavier gauge wire that I had run to my pump back there, which actually uses less watts than this does on startup. So I switched those two cables and it fired right up. So the heavier wire was just enough to keep it from dropping in voltage, and it fired right up. The bad news was I still had it kind of just sitting there with the floor hole in the floor, etc. And soon after it fired up, there was exhaust coming up through that hole in the floor. It made a lot of smoke because it was probably flooded from failing to start so many times. So I shut it right off, but the good news is it did start. I just have to put it all back together today, and I should be good to go. Good news, I am thrilled. I was at a loss there. I'm out of my element on this thing. If I had ever even seen one of these things run in real life, I would have totally knew what was going on, because I had noticed that it seemed like when I primed the pump that it worked better than when it was trying to start up and it was clicking. It seemed like it just didn't have the same power it did when I was priming. But I didn't know. That could have been normal. When it's priming, it could run louder and stronger. No, that's not the case. It just didn't have enough power. And also, even the fans and stuff were louder. So if I had known how loud it should be, I would have probably thought, hey, maybe it's not getting enough power. There were clues, though, because a lot of people have said, oh, these things are great, but they're a little bit loud. And I remember thinking to myself, it's not too loud. That was a clue that I missed. But yeah, I think it is working now. I'm going to put it all back together and show you that, and then we'll know for sure. But I think the diesel heater saga is finally over, thankfully. Well, that was not a lot of fun, but hopefully I will save someone a little bit of the headache I went through. But it's working now, working great, nice and cozy. Uses a little more diesel than I thought it would, but it's not bad. But I did want to point out at this point that when I ordered that heater, the picture on Amazon had the better fuel line, and it also had a different controller that would have allowed you to run the heater either 12 or 24 volts. So if I'd actually received the item that was pictured, I would not have had to replace that fuel line, and I wouldn't have had the issue with the voltage drop, because at 24 volts, the amperage is so much lower the gauge wire that I had run would have been fine. So just be careful if you're going to order one of these diesel heaters from Amazon. Read the comments, because if I had read the comments, there were comments that said, hey, I didn't get what I ordered. You know, I got the chintzy green fuel line, or that the controller was the older style, yada yada. So just something to look out for if you're going to order one of these and you want to run at 24 volts. And just for anyone, you want this other fuel line. It's definitely the squishy green fuel line is not fun to work with. But now that we have all this messy heater business out of the way and it is working well, let's jump to one of my favorite things. Well, one of my favorite things to do is to cook over an open fire, and today we are going to spit roast 2 chickens. I've been getting this fire roaring for about the last hour. Unfortunately, our wood is not all that well seasoned, but the fire is raging. Should work out perfectly. It's going to be awesome. Going in. So it is going well. They are looking good. The breast is getting close to done, so I'm gonna cover them with some foil, the breast and the wings, and let the thighs get a little bit more time, but it's getting pretty close. Well, that was freaking yummy. The chicken was smoky and juicy. The ribs were delicious. We got all the meats from a local farm and they were so good. The sides, the homemade coleslaw, everything. So good. And it was a good time and a great way to end the summer with a bang. And just in time, because shortly after that it really started chilling down and we've had a lot of rain the last 2 days. I've been waiting like 2 days to film this so you don't hear the patter of the rain on the roof here. I also bought myself an induction burner for inside the trailer so that I can easily cook my morning coffee in here instead of going out back and using the camp stove. True, I could bring that stove in, but it's nice having the two, the electric inside, the camp stove outside for if I'm doing something greasy. And yeah, I'm loving it. This particular model I got, it seems amazing. It's a NUWAVE, and you can actually set it to work at either 600 watts, 900 watts, or 1200 watts, which is really nice for camping because you can really balance, you know, what else you're running, what sort of power you have. Are you coming off a generator? Are you coming off your solar? Are you mooch docking and coming off of a regular 15 amp outlet? You could use it at the different levels so that you didn't trip whatever source you were using. I'll let you know as things go, but yeah, I like it so far. It has a manual that's basically a book. There's a whole bunch of features I have no idea what they even do, but the way I'm using it, it's great. Being able to switch those wattages is great. That's pretty much a wrap for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you and have a good one. If you made it this far, why not go ahead and hit that like button? I sure would appreciate it.